Hey everybody, and welcome to another Designer Discourse video where I sit down for an hour with someone who's well versed in the cross-stitch community and we just talk around the houses really. This time around I'm talking with Lord Libidan, a designer who, if you're not aware of him, well, you just need to go and check him out really. You need to visit his website. You need to see that as I describe him as the Batman of cross-stitch, you'll understand why. This guy knows so much stuff, and the interview that we have is truly fascinating. We cover mental health, we cover some real intricacies about the production process of cross-stitch thread, and we just talk around the houses. It's really fascinating, and I think you're going to enjoy it. So I'm going to stop repeating the word fascinating and just let you dive in really. Enjoy. So,
right, hit me.
How did you end up becoming Lord Libidan? Like, when did you start cross stitching?
You could ask me for a date now. That's going to be the hardest thing
Not
ever.
like to the day or whatever. But I mean, how long has it been?
13 years, I think now.
Right.
I was in secondary school and I was bored one Christmas and I was walking through John Lewis, which for some reason had an absolutely massive haberdashery department, and he was right by the entrance, which is fairly rare for John Lewis. And there just so happened to be a cross stitch there, and I thought to myself, oh, you know what, I'll have a go at that. So I had a go at it and I quite liked it, and I thought, oh, that was a good waste of an hour. But then I couldn't stop thinking about its potential. Like, you could do so much more with this, and it annoyed me that they went for something really unimaginative, like a really tiny Highland cow. And I was just like, you know what, there's something more that has to be done here. And at the time, 13 years ago, it was just before the economic crisis. And so there was a resurgence of people sort of starting to get into that. They hadn't really hit the mainstream in any way. And so it was quite sort of on the down low. And I quite liked the fact that, I don't know, a bit hipstery. I wanted there to be there before everyone else. And I don't know, I picked it up and I just thought to myself, this is something that has so much more potential. And I think that whatever I did with it, it was going to be great. So then I did my second one and it was terrible.
Brilliant.
It didn't live up to the hype, but I learned so much from it, and I kind of slowly went from there. And I just so happened to kind of luck into a situation whereby I needed to make a profile on Sprite Stitch, which was sort of a video game related thing, which I've never been a massive retro video game fan. And so to me, it was kind of out of the loop anyway, but that was the closest niche that I could kind of find myself in. So I needed to come up with something new. And at the time I was part of a book club, and there was a new book that was just about to come out called Libidan. And I had a copy of it, and I've never read it to this day. And I thought to myself, you know what, that's a great name, I'm going to steal that. But Libidan on its own is just a bit weird. So how about a nice English fancy word? Oh, Lord Libidan, great. I mean, in hindsight, I should have read the back of the book to realize what it was about.
Let's leave that, because I think I know. But let's not disappoint the public.
Yeah. It was a poor choice, I feel. But it just effectively just sort of stuck, and eventually I became Lord Libidan after being Lord L for a while. And then I started to get my own blog because I was like, where else do I put my stuff that isn't video gamey? And then it just kind of snowballed from there, really. I think I never really set out to be Lord Libidan. It kind of accidentally happened one day, and I'm not really sure when.
It doesn't sound too dissimilar to what happened to me, but it doesn't accidentally happen. It's just you take a series of steps and then you sort of surprise yourself upon reflection, right? How long was it? How long was it after doing that first kit before you started doing your own designs? Because you were pretty like straight away into like video games and stuff, weren't you?
So the first Highland cow I did, and then I did a grommet from a Wallace and Gromit kit, which was really big, like, I don't know, that big maybe, but I managed to get the counting wrong. And so it ended up with one leg really short, and I'm like, how on earth did I manage that? I just skipped out a whole page.
Have you still got it?
And then my third one, I did a proper kit, which was, fancy and proper, and it had backstitch in it, and it was really beautiful. And that's when I suddenly decided that I hated backstitch in every single way, and I was never going to do it again. I mean, technically I did it again. I
was going to say, I can think of it for you, but yeah.
Yeah, at the time, I really hate it, as long with French knots as well. I refused to do the French knots in the kit. But I really realized at that point, this was a great picture, but I did not want it up on my wall. Like this wasn't me. Why was I stitching this thing? I was addicted to cross stitch already, 3 cross stitches in, but then I was like, no, there's got to be something more, something better. One day I just got up and I thought to myself, you know what? I should do something out of like plastic canvas. Oh, I should make a real thing. Oh, it should transform. And suddenly this project just kind of like escalated and escalated into this thing. And I ended up doing like 9 different revisions of it. And, you know, after I finished it, I thought to myself, why on earth did I pick that? Why didn't I just pick something simpler? So that's when I went to cross stitch video games. And
so was the plastic thing? The plastic thing was like your first original.
My first proper
creation.
cross stitch. Yeah.
Jesus Christ, you came out swinging.
I know, right? I don't know why. Like, I just one day I thought, yeah, that'd be a great idea. I didn't really think about how much work would be involved in it. I just went sort of blasé, like head first into it. And of course, at the time, I didn't realize that there were 3D cross stitches out there, mostly of like houses and stuff, which is basically just a square. But I thought, yeah, there's got to be something more here. There's got to be something more that you can do with it. And I just kept thinking that, like, yeah, more. And then it became something more, but a bit much. I don't know. I look at other cross stitchers now, or needle artists now, and I can kind of see exactly the same thing in them. I see their work and I can clearly see their mindset of, hey, this is a great idea. What if we did it a different way?
Yeah.
I can see that enthusiasm that I think I've lost, if I'm truly honest. I think that I've got a bit more sort of refined in my old age, and I've sort of gone for more standard cross stitch. But no, I went head first into it for some reason.
There's always a tug against like the convention of it, I always think, and I've seen it plenty of times. I probably did something similar, except mine was probably down a slightly ruder direction or something like that. I can remember just doing some really sweary things fairly early on, almost to like get out of my system. But it's almost like it's Rage Against the Machine, isn't it? It's you going, I'm not a little old lady, and you know, taking it to the extreme.
I just wanted something that was, I don't know, I'm a bit of a nerd, so I got loads of sort of toys and stuff hanging around here. I can see you got in the background. There's that something that sort of inspired me. Like all of these things, why would I want to stitch a fairy? Why would I want to stitch a wolf? I want something that's kiddie, but not something that a kid would be able to make almost. And that's kind of the sort of thing I went down. I was like, where's this niche that no one's doing? Like, who would think of doing something like a toy out of cross stitch? That's insane. Why would you do that? Well, it's a lot of work. But that was that thing that I felt like I had to do. I had to find that space. I had to do something that just wasn't there already. I don't know. I still feel to some extent that nothing really fulfills my want for cross stitch. But I feel that I don't really know what my want is anymore. Like now it kind of goes a bit here, a bit there. You know, sometimes it's super geeky, like that's a Star Trek thing. You know, that one's a space blueprint and that one's a Japanese print of a bath. It's just like I've got such a weird eclectic mix of things now. But at the time, you couldn't do that. There wasn't an eclectic mix out. You basically had nothing or nothing.
Yeah.
So I just desperately wanted to find something, and so I went head first into the idea of odd.
And were you doing it on paper, or were you doing it on Excel, or did you just get cross stitch software?
On the fly.
Right. Yeah.
So I originally worked out sort of like a leg idea of how that would kind of like function out of paper, and then I thought, oh, I'll make this out of plastic canvas, and I was like, well, I need the second one. Well, what about the hips? Oh no, hold on, it needs a torso. And I kind of just evolved from there. But as soon as I realized that there was something I needed to do, I started going into sort of like a proper paint on windows, you know, literally like a pixel here, a pixel there, before I realized that there was actually programs out there. And to be fair to them, even at the time, they were really advanced and they were really doing a lot of great things. And oh my God, I wish I knew about them before, which is kind of why I've jumped headlong into sort of reviewing them on my website. That's the type of thing that I desperately wanted back when I was sort of cross-stitching. So I kind of feel like an affinity of why those are important. So I desperately tried to get those things out into the public now. You know, like, why is one of them better than the other? What happens if I like backstitch more than I like cross-stitch? What happens if I want to do French knots? Which is the best one for me? And at the time, it was a case of you've got to spend 100 quid and then good luck. And thankfully, they've moved on from that point, which, as a designer, which I don't really call myself in inverted commas, I'm more of a cross-stitcher that happens to design things.
Right.
I feel that I'm still in that stage of the standard cross-stitcher. As a standard cross stitcher, if you want to cross stitch something and you want to cross stitch something that's new and yours, that's kind of what I feel myself at. So I still try to sort of bear that in mind every time I do any new cross stitch. Like, well, what happens if you don't really like backstitch? Well, nah, let's put some in, but not a lot in. What happens if you like the idea of sort of dithering, but it's a bit too much sometimes over large areas? All right, let's cut it down a bit. So I still try and tailor it to that, not beginner level per se, but an intermediate level. I don't want to do advanced things for advanced things' sake, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think that's interesting because I think that's one of the fundamentals of like cross-stitch design is making sure it's a pleasant thing to reproduce and that it's not too taxing in any direction. You know, you've got like massive blocks of color that will just drain people of enthusiasm or whatever.
Yeah, say that again.
Yeah, because I've always thought that like, this is going to sound terrible, but I'm going to carry the analogy anyway. If I'm like the Superman of cross-stitch, I always think you're the Batman of cross-stitch, you see. Because I think about your website and stuff, and it would be good to talk about your website, but you have got this like insight into the world of cross stitch, or you look at it and I think you analyze it and then you share those analytics with other people and stuff. So for people who haven't visited your website and discovered everything about cross stitch, just go tell us about the website.
So I think it's a combination of probably 4 things. So you've got the standard sort of techniques or guides in inverted commas, but generally speaking, they're tailored towards something specific. Like there's hundreds of guides out there in regards to how to wash your cross stitch, but I like to specify why you want to do it that way. You know, does it make more sense to do it with hot water or cold water? This is the possible impacts of you wanting to do it. You know, if you use an aider that's really brightly colored, using hot water is actually going to have a really negative effect unless you've washed it first. So here's a little extra tip that will allow you to do that. Second of all, it's kind of like a mix of inspiration is probably the word that I would use. So did you know that you can do things like this? Like, did you know that you could literally chuck some AIDA into a printer and you can print on your own pattern? So you don't need to get a fancy designed one. It prints
the front door.
Yeah, it prints perfectly. Look at all the things that you could do. You could do like a space thing. You could do this, that, and the other, you know. There's so many more things you can do there. And I don't necessarily do anything with that. I kind of leave it in the eye of the reader to go, oh, that's a cool idea. What can I do with that? And you see occasionally some bits and pieces through the internet of when people have done that. And I've spoken to them about where they got the inspiration. And quite a few of them said me. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember doing a post about that. So I kind of like try to develop other people's stuff without actually sort of giving them a hand-holding guide. I don't want to say, hey, look what other people have done. It's, hey, think about what you could do with this. And then the third thing is kind of investigation is probably what I would say. I have an insatiable habit to find out why. Like on DMC threads, occasionally you'll have like a little dot against the number. And I'm like, well, why is there a dot? What does the dot mean? Sometimes the dot's in front of it. Sometimes it's behind it. Sometimes it's in the top right-hand corner. You know, I've researched why those dots are there.
Why
are there random numbers? It's about batch lots and chemicals that they used to use and which factory it used to be built in. All of them now, of course, are done in France, but in the past, they've been done in America, they've been done in Tunisia, and things like that. And so there's sort of locational hints in the past, if you know what I mean, which is kind of why the numbers don't make any sense. Like, there's a whole raft of numbers that are in the 3000s. Actually, those are the ones that used to be made in the USA. The 3000 is literally the identifier they've got. They're not anymore, but I like the idea of, well, why have they got the 3000? What does that mean? Why do they have to signify that it was made in the US? Turns out there's a different manufacturing technique. So there's lots of different bits and pieces in regards to sort of general interest in regards to cross stitch. And things like reviews as well. Which one's the best needle? Why do some people prefer one needle as opposed to another? I hate Bowden needles. I just don't get on with them at all. But when I pick one up, I can clearly see it's great quality. I clearly know that it's a nice product. And I'd be quite happy to sort of suggest it to other people and say, this is a great product, try it. But equally, I want to say, yeah, but what about the John James needles? You know, that's the type that I like. And actually, it might review slightly poorer than the Bowden needle, but that's the one I like because I can go through them faster because they're cheaper or whatever it might be. So I try to give insight to people that might be stuck in a rut, is probably the word that I would say. Like, it's easy to just keep doing the same thing over and over again. And I'm trying to sort of dispel that habit, be through the way that they cross stitch, the tools that they use, the inspiration they get to do new things or something. I want to always try and push people down a route that they're comfortable with, but equally might be slightly new and slightly interesting. Because sure, cross stitch has moved on massively in the 13 years that I've been doing it, but I still think there are groups out there that aren't fulfilled. They don't know what they want. And so I think it's all about finding that niche for yourself and hopefully getting that people the resources they need to get there. I hope.
That's why you are the world's best cross-stitch detective. My Batman analogy still holds. I swear to God, some of the stuff where I see your blog posts and you just do this thing, and I'll be like, It's cool. It's cool that I think that your resource is there. Do you know what I mean? I think, like you say, it's interesting. I was thinking about Strictly Come Dancing's on at the moment. I know you're a big fan.
Sure. Yeah.
But anyway, no, but Bill Bailey's on it. And, you know, he's learning these dances, but what he's doing around the edges as well is, say, for instance, if he's doing a tango, he's like watching films of tangos and trying to immerse himself in the culture of it so he understands the context a bit more. And I guess what you're saying is, if people want to discover, because when you become a crafts person, you learn about techniques and stuff, but you owe it to yourself to learn about tools and to understand more of the context that you operate in, right?
I don't think you need to. I think that if you want to, it makes sense to. And I think I play video games. As a video gamer, there's a lot of history that existed before I was born. You know, there's a whole raft of games out there that are, in inverted commas, legendary that people refer to now, and actually a vast majority of players haven't played. But to some people, that's just fine, leaving it there. To me, I kind of want to know. I want to know what makes Mario 3D so great now. I want to know why. Where did it start? What happened there? Why are those things that way? And it's quite obvious that you can see a development cycle coming through. And as a result, I get a lot more out of the new Mario games than I think a lot of other people would that haven't played the old ones. Because I can see what they're trying to do. I can see the development. And I think when you cross-stitch, you can just cross-stitch a nice picture. I mean, it's easy enough to do. But actually, if you cross-stitch something that has a legacy to it, that has something else in it, there's something a bit more going on that I think that will help your experience, or at least give you something else to think about when you're cross-stitching and go, oh, I see why they've done that now. So I think there's something there in inverted commas. I don't know. Like the book, everyone knows the book, Rosie Grier's Needlepoint for Men. It is one of the most expensive books in needlepoint. For a lot of people, it's expensive because it's a needlepoint book for men. And all right, that's unique. But actually, that book is really important for a lot of other reasons. And I mean, I've literally wrote a piece for the XStitch magazine, which is going to come out soon. There's so much in that you don't really know just by picking up the book. Like, okay, it's a 70s book. It's very 70s. You know, it's for needlepoint. That's cute enough. It's Rosie Grier, used to be an American football player. He's standing up for men cross stitches everywhere. But actually, without that singular book, you and me wouldn't be sat here today. We wouldn't be cross-stitching anything like the things that we are today. And actually, you can see the themes of things that we do now in Rosie Grier's book back from the 70s. I think he was such a legendary and important figure for us that it's kind of shocking. So when I do things like that Star Trek one, the block colors is something that he mentions in his book. The style of copying something like a car or as that case is a starship, is something he mentions in his book. We're literally still using those concepts that he set down 50 years ago. Wow, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's kind of odd. There's something more there. So when I design something like that, when I cross-stitch something like that, I can feel that, and I think, oh my God, wow, there's 50 years of history here, but no one has ever cross-stitched the locales from Star Trek before. So it's kind of both new, and it's got that old thing in, and it develops that sort of interest more. And that's kind of what I want to foster in people. I want to give them that sort of interest if they want it. Like, it's not for everyone. I'm quite happy understanding that, but there's something else there that could help your understanding, could make it more exciting, could make you go, oh. And I think that's what I'm looking for, the oh moment in the book.
No, that's cool. I think the context is important, you know, and that's what I always think is rare about needlework anyway, is the fact that it's, you know, you talk about a 50-year context there, but I mean, even that is still quite short in the overarching scheme of these things, because needlework's centuries old and it's done all over the world and stuff. So it's like, these pinpoints in time and space that you've got are quite that, but it's a lot more global, isn't it? And I think that's quite a rare thing, and it's a thing that's quite easy to overlook.
Yeah, and I think in the past it's been the reason that we have lots of wolf patterns in cross stitch is because in the Civil War in America there was a lot of wolves, and as a result it's something that you saw a lot, it's something that you heard a lot, and as a result it's something that you kind of had an affinity to because it was in your community. However, in Britain at the time we didn't have wolves, we haven't had wolves for hundreds of years, and I'm sure that that's the case in many other places in the world, yet still you have those wolves now. And I think whenever you stitch something new in inverted commas, so stitch something that is made by a contemporary mind, I think it's made with the understanding that anyone could be cross-stitching this. It doesn't matter if you live in Thailand, it doesn't matter if you live in Australia, in England, in France, in Russia, in China, you're still going to understand it inherently. And I think that that's this thing that you don't get with old patterns. And I think that the designers have moved on, and they have to take that sort of internet global thing into consideration every time they make a pattern. It kind of changes the way they do things slightly.
But don't you think then because one of the things I've observed is that you get these two spheres, then you get like the outer edges, the things that you're saying, the diversity and the fact that cross-stitch design can be globally appreciated, but then you also get the bigger organizations who are catering to a global audience, and therefore they just go for the common and the kind of the middle ground, which is that familiar thing that never really changes because they can't appeal to everybody, so they just pitch for the mass.
Yes, but I think to some extent that's happening with the outliers too. You have a magazine, XStitch magazine is full of contemporary cross stitch. That's something that just wouldn't have existed 5 years ago. You're the thing that's carving that space out. There are devoted readers that like that thing. Now, all of those cross stitchers or needle pointers, I should say, are specifically interested in that environment. And as these older, more heritage brands, let's face it, start going out of business, as generally speaking, the themes change or the mass market, in inverted commas, disappears, you're becoming the new mass market. And it's about making sure that your mass market is the thing that still has that grounding in what you want to stitch. It's quite easy to fall into the trope of going, oh, you want a pattern that's about Easter, I'll make an Easter pattern. It's about kind of thinking about what people might actually want to do and trying to push that envelope. And actually there are brands out there that specifically cater, not necessarily in cross stitch, but they specifically cater for the new. And I think that's the mainstream. And I think like modern art, for example, some of the things that you see are just like, what? I don't get that at all. But a lot of other people will get that. And I think it's because they keep coming up with things that both A, work fantastic, and B, fail miserably. You sort of carve out the new future of modern art, and it kind of develops from that. And I think that even though we are not currently maybe in the majority, I think that we will be. And I think that eventually people will look back on our stuff and go, oh, how antiquated. Why didn't they do all the stuff with the technology? Where are my flashing lights in my cross stitch? So I think that time moves on to some extent, and I think that we're in the precipice right now of when it's about to really change. And I think accidentally we might have made the mass market by being like us. We've stitched the things that we want, and I think that's what originally happened. No one went out of originally and went, you know what, I'll make a brand that sells magazines all over the world and it's got loads of pictures of bunnies in it. No one's thought that. They've just naturally stitched a bunny because they liked it, and eventually other people liked it, and then it kind of developed from there. I think it's easy to be the outlier. It's always really quite hard to be the head of any environment or industry or anything. There's always someone creeping up your coattails. And I think there are many people out there that are creeping up the coattails. It might be the likes of the XStitch magazine. It might be the likes of sort of the Twitch streamers, the floss tubers. There's so many different people out there doing their own thing. And I think eventually one of those or all of those or maybe a mix of some are going to become the new normal. I think so long as we can keep the passion of new and allow new people to come in that question the way that we do things, that's a good thing. You know, you don't want to be in a situation whereby you say, this is the right way, you know, or ignore all those other ways. They're wrong. It's about sort of developing something new. And I think that's the advantage of the likes of the XStitch magazine. You don't get the same thing every single issue. You don't get the same thing every single pattern that's in there. It's always something weird, you know, and it's always something that makes you go, oh, okay. And that's kind of the look that I'm going from my website. The oh, okay. Then eventually, oh, okay becomes mainstream, and then you need something else to be oh, okay. And there's this rolling oh, okay that somehow comes out of the woodwork.
I suppose in a way it's almost like, you could say we're like the punk movement, and somewhere down the line there's going to be the post-punk movement.
Yeah, like, I don't know, maybe we're the metalheads that everyone hates right now, but, you know, eventually everyone's going to be listening to 80s metal because it's actually really quite good stuff. Something like that. I have no idea. I still listen to 80s pop. You know, I wasn't born in that generation, but I still listen to it.
Do you know what's happened to me lately? This is a bit, I can clearly tell, well, because of what? You're like 10 years younger than me, aren't you? Annoying.
I don't know how old you are, so maybe.
I'm 45 at the time of recording.
I am slightly more than 10 years younger than you.
God damn it. But yeah, I've started listening. There's, you know, Magic FM. They have various sister channels. So there's like Magic Soul, which is quite good, but we have Magic Musicals on in our kitchen at the moment.
Sure.
That's where I'm at right now.
I'm going to blame them.
Yeah. Do you know what I do quite like at the moment? Vaporwave. I feel like you'd like that kind of music. Do you know
what it is?
It's kind of like 1980s synths, kind of, imagine like Miami Vice theme tunes and stuff, but they tend to slow them down quite deliberately, and kind of like they're all quite synthy, and a lot of the times it is like that 80s music, a little bit slower, usually a little bit glitchy and stuff like that. I think you dig it.
I'm well into that. Yeah, there's a lot of sort of video games coming out with music like that at the moment as well.
Yeah, well, that's it, yeah. And then a lot of them have pixel art on the old covers when I'm watching them on YouTube or whatever.
We're already mainstream.
Yeah, and that's the thing, because it's cool. The thing I love about cross stitch is you think you know it, but you don't, because someone comes along and does a different thing with it. And I remember that with you, and I know that you felt that with Tom Katsumi. But it's kind of like there's always, and still, aren't there? I saw someone the other day, she called Careless Stitcher on Instagram, who she finds needle points and then takes them. And the picture I posted was of a Mona Lisa design that she'd done, where she'd unpicked the face and put a kiss, you know, like Gene Simmons from Kiss makeup. And she's putting those onto all these pieces, and you're just like, bloody hell, there you go.
To me, there's always something new. Like the picture in the background is the Great Wave, but it's got Pokemon in it. Like, what a genius idea that is. But actually, that's I think it might be even 20 years old now. It's really quite an old image, but it's still kind of modern looking when you think about it. And there's other people doing odd little things here, and there's other little people doing odd things there. And every time I look at a cross stitch that makes me go, oh, that's a cool idea, it always makes me go, oh, why didn't I think of that? But at the same time, there's always something in it that makes me go, oh, actually, I could take this and do something with this. Like, the reason that I love Tom Katsumi is that he has this understanding, is probably the word for it, of things that just seem very normal to me. Like, he did a piece whereby he stitched 3 blocks next to each other, a red, a black, and a blue. And he just did it on such a massive scale. And suddenly it became a picture of Marilyn Monroe. And I was like, what on earth is going on there? But actually, that's exactly how old TVs used to work. He's literally de-engineered an old TV to make a cross-stitch out of it. And I'm like, whoa, where did you get that? What were you doing to think about that? Are you like this close to an old screen that you managed to pick that up? I don't know, there's something with that just makes me go, wow. But then equally, it reminded me of something that I did myself, which was kind of like a 3D cross-stitch with 3D wording on it, which was blue, black, and red, which is kind of exactly the same thing. And all of a sudden I'm like, well, actually, there's something more to that. Maybe there's a whole raft of things that you can do. How do new TVs work? How do we sort of use that with like an e-ink? And, you know, new color e-inks do things sort of very similar way. And so it's like this constant movement of ideas and sort of fashions. And I don't know, I think the reason that I love cross-stitch like that is that I'm never expecting it. Like, I'm never going to go, oh, I wonder what it would have been like if someone took an old TV and made a cross-stitch out of it. You know? There it is on Tom Katsumi's Instagram, and something I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
I think there's something about cross-stitch that allows it to be easy to be transferred into all these different things. essentially it's dots on a white page. And so it's so easy for that to become something. I think that's the reason that I love cross stitch. It's not obvious in first look. Like I can look at a picture of a Sistine Chapel and go, oh, that's a really cute picture of a Sistine Chapel. And then I'll be like, oh, hold on. No, that's pixelated? No, hold on. That's a cross stitch. Someone's cross stitched the Sistine Chapel. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. There's so much more to that. And I think so long as there's always more, it's always easy to get sucked into something. And cross stitch is kind of like that. You know, there's never an end. You're never going to find the perfect cross stitch, just like you're never going to find the perfect book. There's always another book that might be better that you got to keep going for. There's something about that sort of drives me, I think. I want to be the guy that everyone looks at and goes, whoa. But equally, I look at other people and go, whoa, I'm so faster.
You were that guy. You were that guy until Tom Katsumi rocked up. Or
I know,
Keith
right?
Clark, and then it was just like, I was that guy for about 4 minutes until you turned up, but now I'm this guy. I should say
you found me. It's your own fault.
I did. That's right. Yeah, I'm like the Simon Cowell, and you're like the Little Mix. That's a good enough.
Thanks.
No, I did an RGB cross stitch once as well that said the word killers, but when I saw Tom's, I was like, oh, that's how you're supposed to do it. Like all I did really was experiment and give myself a headache in the process or something.
Yeah, I like his experiments always seem so well thought out. And he sort of he chucks them out with such volume as well. I'm like, whoa, what do you do?
Yeah.
Do you sleep?
And then just casually just drops a little tiny embroidery that he's done from an anime or something that's just wistful, and you're just like, oh, for God's sake.
I think the thing about his work is that he looks into the detail as well. Generally speaking, it's quite easy to sort of lose the detail of cross stitch because there is a wider image there. You're not looking at the specifics, but because he does quite a lot of small things, you kind of get a good scope about what he's doing. Like my favorite piece of needlework ever isn't a cross stitch, but it's one of his. It's a wheat farm. And as a southerner from a city, well, a big town that was almost a city, I've never really sort of grasped the ins and outs of a wheat farm. Like, I know wheat grows. I know it's not all one color. You know, it's pretty standard. And so he's got this big wheat farm, and it's very sort of typical. But if you look at it at the right angle, you can see that some of the threads are being cut ever so slightly shorter. And now that I live up north with farms around me, I know that the reason for that is because the tractors go down that specific route, and they sort of make the earth slightly harder. And as a result, the corn doesn't grow as high. Like, he's picked up the smallest of details and somehow managed to put it in. I'm like, whoa, like, what were you doing? Sitting in a farm for hours on end, like penciling out all the details? How does he do that? And I think for a lot of cross stitches, there's always that sort of little thing that's hidden. Like in every single one of my cross stitch that I do, there's always something that's wrong. And it's overtly wrong. And as soon as you know it's there, you're like, oh, that's clearly wrong. He's done that wrong. Yeah, I kind of like the fact that there's a hidden wrong in there, like a bit of an Easter egg that if you're looking really hard, you can find it. But if not, you kind of like glance over it. I quite like the idea of that. And it's a natural wrong as well. Like, I don't plan it. You know, I'm just terrible at counting. So it kind of naturally comes in. And there's something about that I quite enjoy, the sort of like assessing people's work to see, oh, have they done that? Oh, the thread's slightly different there. Or, oh, they blended that slightly differently. I don't know, there's always something more, isn't there? Like, there's never a stop.
Do you think part of it comes from the contemplative process of stitching? Because you still stitch all your stuff, don't you? You still have the time to do that sort of thing. So you're in that zone. And I can remember in the days, you know, you'd be stitching a thing and maybe you'd be getting towards the end of a piece and another idea would start to come along, which may have come from the thing you're making or whatever. But, you know, it's all, and you've got the time to be in that, like, and because, you know, it's not like some things where you have to completely focus on what you're doing. So you get that drift and then you come back again, and you get that drift and you come back. So creativity's up here while you're being sort of meditative in the moment as well.
Yeah, yes.
Good answer.
So like the Star Trek one that I've done there is literally under an empty frame. Like, I started that one, and as soon as I started that one, because I was watching Star Trek at the time, I thought of a really cool idea. And so I bought a frame for it before I even started it. I still haven't started it. The frame's there. Yeah. But there's this constant idea of, oh, there might be something more, and I watch a bit of TV and, oh, that's a cool idea, and oh, that's a nice picture, and oh, that's a bit of cinematography that I like, or whatever the word is. And so there's always that something that's there, but of course you're always stitching at the same time. and you kind of get lost in that. So a lot of the ideas that I have are in a little book, and they merge together. Eventually I'll go through that book and I'll go, oh, that's a cool idea, and I still need to do something with that, but then I'll mix it with another cool idea, and it becomes its own idea. And I think the fact that when you cross stitch, you have to break down a cross stitch. You know, when you paint, you know that you have to paint one color after the other. You know, when you cross stitch, you have to do one stitch after another. You're actually thinking about the single individual stitches and the way that you might sort of bend the thread around that arc so you don't have to cut it off or something. There's always something more that you have to think about that isn't just you put a stitch in. You know, a lot of non-cross stitchers think, oh yeah, that's easy, you just put a stitch in. Yeah, when they try it, they find it hard because it's more than that. And I think because you have to break down what you're doing, you have to analyze something that is very simple in essence in such great detail that you kind of stop thinking about the larger picture. You know, whenever I stitch, I stitch that single Pokemon or that single icon or whatever it might be, and I forget about the fact that there's 150 other icons exactly the same across the rest of it. You lose the wider picture, and as a result, you allow yourself to think about a different wider picture. I'm cross-stitching a Tory gate, sure, but actually I'm watching a show about France. You know, oh, well, what about using some of the French architecture in a picture? Oh, that might be a cool idea. And suddenly it's becoming its own thing whilst I'm desperately concentrating on what I'm doing, trying to count right without making a mistake because I didn't bother gridding it out because I'm crazy. Yeah, at the same time, you're also watching something and it's also peaceful in the same way. It's kind of like a weird amalgamation of weird things. I think it's kind of like meditation. Like proper meditation isn't actually thinking about nothing. It's just kind of letting things go. And when you let things go, suddenly things come to you. Like I have a pad next to where I meditate because I know full well that as soon as I meditate, my mind is like, oh, what about that thing that you were meant to do 3 months ago that's just really out of date? I'm like, oops. So there's always that sort of, I don't know, thing that comes out of it. And cross stitch is very odd and unique in that way. I sew as well, and sewing is so very different. Like
you mean like dressmaking sewing?
Yeah. You have to sort of desperately think about making sure that that's the right measurement and that's looped up right, and it's so much more involved. But essentially, it's actually just throwing some thread on a bit of cloth. You know, cross stitch is different in that way. It's so regimented, especially if you're using something like a Ada, where you have to physically put it in a hole. And it's almost like your needle finds the hole. You know, you don't really have to do that much work. It allows you to kind of lose yourself whilst concentrating. And I think that's a really unique task. I don't think you get a lot of that. Like, that's kind of why I listen to music when I work, like actual work, is because I can kind of lose myself in it and my mind will think in the background about something else. And most of the time when I've come up with a cross stitch idea, it's when I've been working on something like a big Excel sheet and suddenly I'm like, oh, hey. It just kind of comes to me from nowhere. And I think cross stitch is good because it allows you to have both minds working, like your conscious mind and your subconscious mind together, but kind of separate.
I think it's really rare. I think it's a really rare thing to find that, you know, and I've seen that in all the teaching of workshops and stuff, and you see people getting in that space, and it is as well. And I've said it before, but it's just like when meditation, you know, when your mind drifts, you're sort of supposed to try and bring it back to center if it drifts too far. But when you're stitching, you're always coming back to the moment because you've got another hole to go through. So no matter what you're doing, you're always there. Yeah. And then you're always there, which makes it like this ultimate blooming craft. And like you say, many other crafts you can get in that mindfulness zone, but there are a few that are as like hypnotic or something. Is it?
Yeah. The hypnotic is a good word. It's like meditation without trying to meditate.
Which in a way surprises. Well, it surprises me that then you say that you also meditate, because I was talking to Rhys in a discourse interview that will be available up here. But she doesn't meditate because she doesn't feel she needs to. But then she also said that if she doesn't do any cross stitching for a few days, she starts to feel a little bit antsy, and so obviously that's filling that space.
I am an incredibly anxious person. I actually developed IBS because of my anxiety about 2 years ago.
Right.
To me, there's so many things that are bubbling below the surface that it's kind of hard to get a grip with them sometimes. And so I did start to meditate. But what I actually realized is when I started getting these IBS symptoms, I'd stopped cross-stitching for a while. And it's only through sort of like now that I'm sort of like a meditator in inverted commas, that I've suddenly realized that actually that's what it was doing. And I missed out on the meditation, so I had to pick it up somewhere else. And you know, it's easy enough to get into a habit now, and that's why I meditate as well.
Cool.
But without a doubt, whenever I'm feeling a bit down and a bit shitty in inverted commas, I know that my go-to thing is to cross-stitch, because I know that whatever mood I'm in, it'll bring me back up to like a neutral. It won't bring me back up to like a happy.
Yeah.
But you know, it'll bring me up to something whereby I'm like, oh, okay. You know, if I get up on the wrong side of bed, it's fine. I can cross-stitch and it'll bring me back. You know, it has this meditative effect, but at the same time, because I do other things as I cross-stitch, it's getting harder to separate cross-stitch and the other things. You know, I'm always thinking about, oh, I could do a blog post on this, that, and the other. And actually that kind of takes you down a whole different route, which is less meditative. And as a result, it's kind of like separated away. But to this day, I still yearn to cross-stitch. You know, a lot of people have thought about the worst things that could possibly happen to them. And you know what? It's not the end of the world. I'm not going to be here, so I'm not going to care. But if I lost my hand and I couldn't cross-stitch anymore, I don't know what I would do with myself. Like, genuinely, that frightens me. None of the other things about living I've bothered to think about. You know, not having a hand is a big thing, but to not be able to cross-stitch, suddenly I'm worried and I'm getting anxious about not being able to cross-stitch. And, you know, there's always something. I think that's why I combine the both. There's something pleasurable about the meditation that you get from cross-stitch, whereas normal meditation's not really that pleasurable. It's just neutral in the vocals. I don't know. It's kind of like a mix of the two. To me, whenever I read a post about the meditative effects of cross-stitch, I always wonder who's writing them. I feel like it's written by someone that is writing a post for the post's sake, and they kind of know that it's a meditative kind of thing, but they've not actually really experienced it themselves. And I think cross-stitch is such a personal thing. You know, it's kind of like a religion in that sense. There's a book, you know, that details everything about cross-stitch. It's just a Bible, you know, a standard
the
technique.
Mr. XStitch Guide to Cross-Stitch.
That's the one, yeah. Other cross-stitch books available. Yeah. But your unique, specific way to cross-stitch is so very different. Like, whenever I cross-stitch a specific way. Whenever I start a project, I go through my own sort of like analysis of how I do that. I know that whenever I get new threads, I do certain things with them to put them on the spool. And I always put them on the spool a specific way, because it means that I can just pull them off really quickly without thinking about it. And there's all these little things that allow me to cross-stitch in my way. And I think it's such a personal journey. I know that the way that I cross-stitch isn't the way that you cross-stitch. And I have no idea how you cross-stitch. I've never watched you cross-stitch.
Yeah, I've got no idea these days.
I don't know, it's something so personal. It's something more. Whereas meditative practices on their own, whatever you're doing, is kind of generic.
Also, when you meditate, you build a sense of self and a sense of self-assurity. But when you cross-stitch, you build a physical thing as well. Each stitch is a progression and a growth. You know, I remember when I was writing the book and I was looking into a bit of the mental health stuff, and they were saying about, you know, people who lack self-esteem can use cross-stitch because every single stitch is a victory. And they can build upon that sense, you know. So actually, as well as all the meditative stuff, you end up creating a thing, and you get that visual progress that you're making as well, which I think is probably what you can't get from meditation in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, whenever you make a thing, regardless of what that thing is, be it cross-stitch or something else, there's also the sort of the completionist nature of that thing. You know, I'm actually a very shy person. You know, if I was being me, I probably wouldn't be doing something like this. But because of cross-stitch, I know that when I make something, I can put that out there on the World Wide Web. You know, some people might hate it. That's, you know, there are haters out there. The vast majority of people will be like, oh, wow, that's really good. Even if I know that it's not, even if I'm questioning it myself, there are people out there that are saying, oh, that's a nice idea, or, oh, what a clever way of doing something. And that builds confidence in itself. And I think the reason that cross-stitch for me has been so important is because it's kind of allowed me to be me. You know, I'm a bit of a weird person, you know, admittedly. Not a lot of people are like me. Every time they meet me, you can clearly see people thinking to themselves, what is he talking about? But I'm quite happy in my own skin now because of cross-stitch. It's allowed me to go, I'm doing something different. This is what it is. Take it or leave it. It's fine. But I'm doing this for me. And I think meditation is more like, I'm doing this. That's kind of it. I don't know. There's something magical about it.
Well, because like when you look at the pictures behind you and stuff, you've got physical representations of your own creativity there. And one of the things that you were saying before about your process of starting made me think about Japanese tea ceremonies, which is another thing that I know that you like as well. So you can see that there's just these overlays. There's probably a Venn diagram of like sci-fi, Japanese culture, you know, Zen and all that. And yours is in the middle of it.
Without doubt. And I think this kind of makes it up as well. I think as I look at the reason I have my stuff on the wall isn't because I'm proud necessarily of these things. It's because I want to improve these things. Like that picture used to be a Voyager, which used to be about half the size. And after stitching it, I realized that I can do things better. And so I redid it bigger with a different starship from Star Trek, the Enterprise. And so it kind of went from there. And there's always something here that I want to do more of or better or in a different way. Like the one I'm blocking with my head, that one, it's got a lot of blue in the background. It's a nice Japanese print and all, but it's quite dark. And it sort of like draws the viewer into it. But I kind of want something a bit more light and airy. And so now I'm stitching one that's a bit more summery. And actually it might fit in that frame if I ever get around to doing it. But it's something that I can sort of improve on and improve on myself. You know what I mean? Like there are points in which I've had a dark outlook on life, but there are other times in which I've had a positive outlook on life, or I've thought about the future or the past or whatever. And there's loads of little hints there that allow me to sort of explore myself. I think as a designer, that's something that you don't get as an average cross-stitcher. I think you can find something that fits your niche or fits your mood or what you want to stitch as a standard cross-stitcher. And there's enough out there now that, you know, generally they're easy enough to find and they're cheap enough. But by being a designer, you kind of allow yourself to come into it a bit more. You allow yourself to be a bit more geeky, you know, something like that. Like, I've never seen a pattern that geeky before. I never imagined doing a pattern that geeky before. I thought to myself, you know what, this is a great idea, I'm doing it. And it's allowed me to sort of, I don't know, own the geekiness in myself. If you know what I mean.
And spend a long time, because you're stitching it, spend a long time owning that geekiness as well, because that must have taken a fair few hours to make, right?
Honestly, it required more to plan it out and design it than it did to stitch it. But I think the advantage of the way that I design is kind of the same. You know, I literally place every single stitch. I don't take something like an image and adapt it or convert it. I literally go, I've got an idea. This is the scale I want. Let's start building it up. Right. And effectively, I do that sort of pixel art thing of I have a blank screen and I build up an idea and it changes and adapts as things happen and I get more inspiration. I do a little bit of this and I do a little bit of that. And it kind of allows me to think about the individual things. And it's only after I've done the pattern that I stand back and go, oh yeah, that does look good. Now I'm actually prepared to give some time to it after already giving 100 hours to the pattern design. Suddenly that's when you start stitching it. And that's because I've already come up with that thought pattern of why I'm putting this here and why I'm doing that there. That allows me to be a little freer when I'm cross-stitching. It means I can think about other things and I can think about the next pattern or what might be the next thing, or, you know, even inspirational point of view, I might be thinking about the next video game that's coming out and cool things to do with that. Oh, that's another little something.
Because I guess you've had all your arguments in the design process. So this is just like the execution of it. So what software do you use and what's your process for well, you said you build things up bit by bit or whatever. So what software do you use?
Well, actually, I use a whole vast library of software, depending on what specifically I'm doing. So generally speaking, I use something called PictoPixel, which is actually a pixel art creation software. It doesn't allow you to do anything fancier, but it layers it up and you can kind of get a good idea of that. And that's generally speaking where I build the image. Right. And then I take that and then I put it into another formal designing program. But depending on what the specific application might be, I will use a different set. So the likes of that one has a lot of backstitch in it. I personally prefer the backstitch in MaxStitch or WinStitch than I do in PC Stitch. So that's built entirely out of that one. But this one, which is the one I did before it, I did in PC Stitch. It allows you to sort of do a lot of blocks nicer, and it's slightly faster and something like that. And I'm in a unique position of having a Mac as I'm talking on now, but I also have a Windows laptop as well. So I can kind of mix between the two whenever I want. And there are industries out there that want specific formats for specific things. You know, for the magazine, you want PC Stitch. But when I did a series of books and kits, I had to do those in, I can't remember what it was. I think it might have been KG chart or something or other. It was something very specific to that thing, because that's the output that they wanted. For me personally, I kind of use so many now that it's fine. I can use any of them. They're all much of a muchness. I think I would still, on principle, say that MaxStitch and WinStitch is better.
Right.
I think the reason being is that I have a good relationship with the designer. And so I know what he's doing in the background, how he's improving things, what he's doing to make it the best out there. He's the type of person like me that constantly thinks about what next, what if. And I think it needs something like that. And to be fair to the guy that runs PC Stitch, he might be doing that too. I don't have much of a relationship with that, so I don't know. I'm also the type of person that likes to get other people's opinion. So I have a whole raft of people that review software, cross-stitch products that I send out to, and they've just, and I literally mean just, picked WinStitch and MaxStitch above PC Stitch. But honestly, they're both fantastic programs. I would say to anyone, regardless of what level you want to go into, those are the two programs. Pick one of them. But that said, there are a lot of people that prefer things like Threadbare, which is a program that you can literally just drag an image to and it will do a fantastic output. And the dithering in Threadbare is honestly next level.
I think for those uninitiated, I think you should explain dithering, because it's not people going, that's not, that is dithering.
So dithering is how you might display one color merging into another color. So generally speaking, in cross stitch, especially in old kits sort of from the 60s and 70s, you've got color 1, color 2, and then there's like a diagonal line that sort of merges all of them, and you kind of got like a mesh at the middle. That is dithering, but it's not very good dithering. The proper dithering will take color 1, color 2, and it will find 6 other colors in the middle of that, and it will merge them using exactly the same sort of like pixelated chessboard pattern, but it will do it at random. And so you don't get this obvious pattern of color mixing. You get like a smoother transition into one from the other, which if you're doing an actual picture is a really important thing. A lot of the stuff that I do in the background here is sort of very simplistic. It's cut down to its individual layer. The background on that one is just one blue, but in the real thing is like a merge between 3 different blues that have come up with the sky. It's the thing that I don't like to stitch because it's a lot of work and I'm bad at counting. But if you want to make something real or real life facsimile, that's the thing that you kind of need. I think that's what makes Threadbare such a good program for something like a photograph. If you got like a loved one and you want a picture of them, that's the way forward, not PC Stitch. You want to make something from scratch, that's PC Stitch.
And you don't mind a bit of confetti, because there'll be
loads of confetti.
Some people like that.
Generally speaking, you can cut down on confetti using good dithering. There's 2 ways of cross stitch programs work. There's way A, which effectively pixelates the image and then looks at every single pixel and works out what the closest color to that is. And as a result, there might be a fleck of someone's makeup on the right of their eye might be red. And so you'll get like a weirdly bright red. They just won't be in place. And that's confetti that you really don't like. But the other side of things is whereby someone takes an image, they find out every single pixel in that image, then find a color specific to that pixel, then they pixelate it down to the size you want, then they work out the best transition between the 2 pixels would be to give you a smoother transition, which generally speaking means that it's a program that you have to download. I think Threadbare is an advantage because it's all online. It does a lot of that outside of your computer. It takes a lot more effort to do. It's a lot more advanced to do. And I think that's the problem that people have. They quite, you know, everyone likes something free, and there are a lot of free programs out there that will do a job, but they won't necessarily do it a good job. And I think spending I don't know what it is, 10 quid to get a pattern from Threadbare will be a better pattern that you end up spending 100 hours stitching. You know, sometimes it's worth that small amount of money to get something perfect as opposed to goodish.
I like it. So you take comfort in calling yourself a designer, yet the conversation we've had suggests that secretly you're an artist because you're expressing yourself. What's the trade-off? What's the trade-off? Don't wimp out and say you're a cross-stitcher. No, because you're not. Because you're not just sitting there doing cross-stitch. You're making patterns. You're informing the discussion. You don't get to sidestep that one.
I think it's a fine line between the two. Andy Warhol considers himself an artist because he likes to make art. He likes the end product. He likes the thing that ends up being hung on the wall. I don't really care for that. Once it's up on the wall, you know, it needs to look pretty, but I like the process of doing the stitching. I'm doing it for the purpose of making. And I think designing allows you to make. And I think we have a concept as humans in general to kind of split up design into someone that makes the actual tool to allow you to do it, i.e. the pattern, and then separately the person doing the work, stitching it. And I think that that's an unfair accusation to make. I think as a cross stitcher, you get a pattern and you can do that pattern exactly the way that it says. But equally, another person can do it exactly the way that it says, and it will come out different. You know, there's a way of interpreting the pattern. And I think inherently, I'm a designer, but actually I would argue that most cross stitchers are designers too, regardless of how much they design. Because every time you pick up a pattern, you're designing an element yourself. You're going, oh, I might do the thread, the tops of the thread going in that direction, as opposed to the pattern that suggests that it's in that direction. Or, you know what, I don't like the fact that there's confetti up in that top corner. I'm just going to blank that out and do it in one singular color. You make all these micro choices yourself, and actually that's design at the end of the day. You're doing it because you want the process of making that thing, as opposed to just going, oh yeah, I'll just follow the list and do it the way that it says. I think that's an artist's mentality, whereas a designer's mentality is analyzing and making the choice yourself, regardless of how important or big or small that choice is. So no, I put myself as a designer. I'm not sure I would say that I know any cross-stitch artists. In my mind, we're all designers. Bold statement, I know. I think the closest one to that would be someone like Tom Katsumi, actually. Once he's done a project, he tends not to go back to it. He does a thing and then moves on. And I think part of his mentality is he likes to make that thing to be, just to exist on its own. Whereas I like to analyze and then redo and redo and redo. Like the one that I've done that on twice. You know, I'm doing 101 different Japanese prints. The transformer that I've got over there, my original one, I've done patterns for that are like 6 different transformers because I'm improving every time. I think that's the designer mentality, however small it might be.
Emma McKee, you know, who does the stuff for hip hop artists, like she was in the Beats issue. She's probably an artist, isn't it? She doesn't even make the patterns available to anybody else. She does the one piece, the one time it's gone. Keith Clark's probably that kind of design,
but specifically just to her. She doesn't necessarily have to market it for her to think about the design. When she's doing it, she knows that it has to fit, you know, within the back of a jean jacket or wherever it might be. She has to think about the sizing. She has to think about, actually, am I going to do confetti stitches? How accurate is it going to be? Am I going to do sort of like a blended effect on the words or whatever? She's making those choices. So still she's a designer, even if it's for a product at the end. But that said, she's in a very unique position because she's making clothing effectively, isn't she? And as a result, you know, we always say clothing designers. We don't say clothing artists.
Interesting.
I think design and art is because a designer doesn't really have a fixed term. I don't think artist really has a fixed term either.
I think that's right. I think that's why the discourse is good. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's good fun to bat that idea around. That's a good one. I'm just trying to
worry people about it. I've often thought if cross stitch is art or craft.
Yeah.
And I think that's another one that's very similar. Like, as a crafter, are you making the thing to enjoy the craft, or are you making it to have the end product? And I think that's kind of a very similar argument to the designer artist thing. Are you making it to have a piece of art at the end, or are you having it to enjoy the process?
I sometimes feel like
more the process.
Some of those, and I'm not disparaging the brand at all, but you get those heaven and earth designs that are massive, and the designs themselves might not personally be to my taste, but people who love those love them, don't they? Because they love the sheer voyage that they go on making them. That's what they do.
Really speaking, I've always avoided full cover patterns. That's not really something I do a lot of, and I think the first one was that one up there. I get why people like the full coverage patterns. It's like back when I first started cross stitch and people were doing lots of small ones, video game characters tend to have a lot of white in them, like maybe it's their skin or their eyes or something. People always ask the question, do I fill the white in, or do I leave it out because it's just white and it's on white? And I think that's the point where artists or designers really come into effect. Like, well, I would always fill it in because it makes a solid object about that thing. Whereas someone that just wants to get it done and as a result doesn't care about filling in those eyes might be more of an artist. They want to see what the end product is like.
Or are you more of a crafts person because you're taking time to ensure that the product is created with finesse?
No, it's never good.
yeah, right. Even though it's a deliberate mistake and all that.
Yeah. I do a lot of crafts. So that's a hard thing to say. I think cross stitch is very different to that, though. I kind of think that's why I have a blog. To me, there's always that question in cross stitch. It doesn't matter what it's about: art, craft, artist, designer, DMC, anchor, this thread, that ADA, that ADA. There's always this question in regards to what you might want to do, the product, the thing, how the story has come about. And I think to me, I've never picked if I'm an artist or a designer, because I think that actually it's always up there as a question, regardless of what it is. It's always there for a question. There's no black and white. If you want to be an artist today, fine. If you want to be a designer tomorrow, fine. It'll be exactly the same task. It's all right. Just your outlook.
Yeah. If it makes you happy and you're not screwing somebody over, then
who cares?
Do you have any tips for people who might want to get into like cross stitch design?
Go, do it. Simple as that. It doesn't matter what you're doing, how you go about doing it, what you think might be the conceived right way of doing it. There isn't one. Simple as that. A lot of people contact me and they say, you've got a great selection of posts on how to cross stitch design using PC Stitch, Win Stitch. I like paper. And I'm like, well, okay, that's fine. All you got to do is effectively take exactly the same principle, just do it on paper. There's nothing different about it. Eventually you start with a blank piece of paper, screen, wherever you might want to be, and you put something on it. The first thing that I ever designed was a Space Invader. I copied a Space Invader from something else. Then I put a little line next to it because it looked like someone was shooting it. And then I put the little ship on the right-hand side. Now, actually, what I've done is I've moved the standard Space Invader screen from sort of vertical to horizontal in order to make a picture. That's all I did. I didn't make anything new. I just moved things around a bit. And that was enough that it allowed me to sort of go on from that and make something ridiculously complicated. So there's nothing holding you back. Pick something easy, pick something complicated, go for it. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to go, I've lost it now. I don't understand what I'm doing anymore. And if you're in a situation like that, there are so many people out there online that are willing to jump in and help you, give you advice. It might be the likes of me. It might be the likes of sort of people on Facebook groups or on Reddit or something. Cross stitch, unlike a lot of other groups that I've been part of, really doesn't have that many detractors. If you're into cross stitch, you're willing to help other people. You're willing to sort of talk about it. People love cross stitch. It's simple as that. You wouldn't spend 100 hours stitching unless you loved it. So don't be scared of the fact that you might get lost in this idea of design and get a bit complicated. It's okay if you get lost. People will be out there to help you. And hopefully I class myself as one of those.
Yeah,
so.
And if you have any obvious questions, don't forget to visit lordlibidan.com because you probably
send me an email as well. I'm quite happy to answer you. I still answer people all the time.
I think we've pretty much nailed everything I could think of to talk about. Is there anything that you feel like is...
To me, I think the biggest thing that we've probably not spoken about is people's concept of their own cross-stitch ability. I think it's easy to get stuck into the idea of us being designers and you being cross-stitchers. And I think that's something that's negative to the whole environment. But I think at the end of the day, we're doing the same thing that you are. You're doing the same thing that we are. And I think there should be this sort of blurring of the line between the two. You know, I pride myself on being that guy that you can contact and ask about the weirdest things. Like this morning, I got someone that phoned me up, they sent me an email. And he asked, I've got a specific needle type, and it's slightly smaller than the average people that would use for that fabric type. I'm wondering if I do that, if it will stretch out the holes, and once I've washed it, will they go back? And I'm like, well, I know the answer to that. I'm quite happy to send you a 5-minute reply to say what the answer to that is. The vast majority of people I've ever spoken to in cross-stitch, regardless of who they are always willing to do the same thing. Back when I was a young cross-stitcher, Jane Greenoff was the highest of celebrities, you know, to some extent she still is.
Still is, yeah.
I actually sent her an email, and she came back to me. She sent me a reply. And I was just like, well, if the likes of you, perceivably the highest echelon of cross-stitcher out there, are willing to come back to me, I think it humanizes everyone. Everyone should just be like, it's all good. You know, it doesn't matter who you are or what you do. It's your enjoyment of cross-stitch and what you do that makes things important.
That's probably one of the fun things, again, about cross-stitch, and one of the reasons why cross-stitch gets derided as an art form is because it's so blooming accessible. So, yeah, every single person that picks up a needle and thread has got the ability to be Jane Greenoff or to just be somebody who does cross-stitch and be content with that, isn't it? It's not a...
Exactly. And I think for those people that have made cross-stitch art, like Victoria and Albert Museum in London, they have cross-stitch up in samplers. And if you go there and you look at them, they just look like samplers. And, you know, they're iconic because they're so old or because it was specifically new at that time or something or other. There's reasons they're there. But if you read the biopsies of the people that have done them, they're just people.
Yeah.
Like, generally, like, one of the best pieces that I like is a piece whereby a young girl has effectively ranted about the fact that she really, really hates her life. And it's in red block capital letters, the whole thing along. And it kind of just ends with her going, I wish I was dead. And it's just like, whoa, there's such a thing going on there. That's actually just a 14-year-old girl who just really, really hated having to, you know, be at a Catholic school.
She'd be on TikTok these days, but back then...
But, like, her piece is iconic because it's like that. It's nothing else like that. But actually, she ended up not cross-stitching at all in the end. It was just her outlet at the time. And you just want to come into a cross-stitch, do a thing, and then leave again. That's okay. You can get yourself in a museum in 100 years if you're lucky. She managed it.
So maybe think it, but don't overthink it.
Yeah, just get on with it. Do it. You know, have a punt. If it goes wrong, it's fine. As I said, the second ever cross-stitch I did, he had a really short leg. It's fine. You know,
the Victoria and Albert Museum now, that is a piece.
Yeah, maybe, yeah. Copyright issue, I feel. But yeah, there's just something there for cross-stitch for everyone. Doesn't matter what you get out of it. Try it, have a go.
Yeah, right. Fair play.
That's it, I think.
Thanks, man. Where can people find you online?
Everywhere.
Yeah, pretty much.
Google my name, Lord Libidan, or lordlibidan.com. You can also find me on Instagram, Pinterest, Flickr, Facebook, Twitter, pretty much every social media that exists.
Ask a question about cross-stitch into the internet and inevitably Lord Libidan will have the answer.
Well, I hope so. That's my aim in life.
If he doesn't have the answer, let him know that he can go and get the answer. Because Jesus Christ, he is the Batman of cross-stitch.
Or answer it and then tell me. That's always the more.
Perfect.
I want to know too. Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time.
That's all right. I have to do it.
So there you have it. I told you. What a great interview. I mean, Rhys, I've known him for a very long time. And whenever we get together and start talking, we can go on for a very long time. So the fact that we managed to talk for, you know, not much longer than an hour is testament to, I don't know, my sense of timekeeping, perhaps. Because not only is he a really interesting person, he's really clever. We didn't even talk about, like, marketing and those kind of things, which is something that I talk to him about an awful lot. He knows so much stuff, and yeah, if you've got any questions about the world of cross-stitch, whether it's what needles are made from, as we discuss, you know, why the numbers are certain ways. Just go and visit lordlibidan.com, trail your way through his archives, and you'll be enlightened. And then his designs, you know, he's done so many things I wish I'd done, but he's really generous with his thoughts, his ideas, his creativity. You know, you can tell that he is in love with cross stitch, and it comes through in everything that he puts out there. So I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Don't forget to check out the other Discourse designer videos in the series, and of course, if you like the video, please be sure to give it a like. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because there are more discourses on the horizon, my friends. And until next time, my name's Mr. XStitch. Happy stitching.